These are the oldest stories, online at oldeststories.net. And if you haven't yet, consider checking out the new improved oldeststories.net website. There's a list of recommended readings, show notes for every episode, and a few ways to contact the show with questions, comments, or whatever else. Kumarbi wants the throne of heaven, and today he's going to pull out all the stops to secure the crown for his lineage, no matter how monstrous that lineage gets. Today, we look at the songs of Hedammu and Ullikummi, tales which carry Greek echoes in the tales of Typhon and Antaeus, respectively, though here the correspondence is a bit looser than it was between the Theogony and the Song of Kumarbi. Though we know that there were many tales of Kumarbi and his attempts to win the throne, these two today appear to have been fairly important tales within the genre. Today, we will see character development that appears to wind down the otherwise endless cycle. The monsters will grow so large that it will be hard to top them, even by the overblown standards of myth. More importantly, we will see character development across the stories, most critically Ea finally growing tired of Kumarbi's antics and reconsidering who he should be supporting. But also, we'll be seeing some character development in Shaushka, who is Tessub's sister. Like the other tales, our first story today, the Song of Hedammu, is fragmentary and begins in the middle of the action. Kumarbi has a plan, but this plan must be conducted in absolute secrecy for it to have a chance of working. Kumarbi opens by speaking to his vizier, Mukasanu, and giving a message he's to relay to the god of the sea, whose name is unclear. In the Hittite fashion, the name of the god as it would be pronounced is not written down, and instead we're just given a title, and it's assumed that the reader will know who the tablet is talking about. In any case, the messenger travels under the ground to prevent the moon, sun, or gods of the dark earth from seeing him. Apparently, the sun and moon are notoriously gossipy. When he arrives at the sea god's palace, his message is short. Kumarbi is calling you. The matter is urgent. Come promptly. Make sure you travel beneath the earth, so that the sun, moon, and dark earth gods cannot see you. When the sea god heard this, he wasted no time in getting up and taking the journey, making the long passage without any stops for rest. When finally arriving at Kumarbi's place, he was treated spectacularly. He was given a chair and offered a footstool to put his feet up. He was lavished with food and wine. Meanwhile, Kumarbi whispers to his vizier Mukasanu that he must quickly go lock the door after checking outside to ensure that there were no eavesdroppers. The fragment ends here, and we miss the meat of the discussion between the two. When our story picks up, the sea god has been impressed by all of Kumarbi's flattery and has agreed to a marriage proposal. He tells Kumarbi that in 7 days, Kumarbi is to travel to the sea god's house, where he will receive a wife, the sea god's daughter, Sertap-Suruhi, a massive sea snake who is 50 miles long and a mile wide. The sea god assures the groom-to-be that he will enjoy all the pleasures of marital bliss with the 50-mile-long sea snake, and it will be like drinking sweet cream. Though the formalities of marriage are entered into, and both parties appear to be quite happy with the arrangement, and with the lavish wedding accompanied by musical instruments, it's difficult to assume that Kumarbi feels any sort of either lust or love for a miles-long sea snake. But like most important marriages of the Bronze Age, this was first and foremost a political transaction. We are thankfully spared the scenes of lovemaking and birth, for Kumarbi impregnates Sertap-Suruhi, and eventually she gives birth to the sea monster Hedammu. None of the surviving fragments clearly describe Hedammu, but given his power and his parentage, we can easily imagine pretty much any terrifying deep-sea creature we care to think of. Early in his childhood, we have a fragmentary description of how, swimming around the ocean, Hedammu would eat absolutely anything, big things and small things, and nothing it encountered could resist being eaten. When our next fragment opens, Shaushka is distressed. She's arrived at the palace of the gods, and naturally she's offered a chair to sit in, but this she refuses. She's offered food, but she's too distressed to eat. She's offered a drink, but she's too distressed for a drink. This is a common trope in Hurrian literature, a messenger with a message so urgent that he or she refuses all hospitality, insisting that the message must be delivered straight away. And so they ask her, "What's the news?" And Shaushka begins to tell of a horrifying threat from beneath the sea. Sadly, here too our descriptions of Hedammu are cut off, and so while we can tell that it must be some particularly great menace, we're lacking in specifics. As she speaks of the horrible devastation that Hedammu has wrought in the world, her tears flow like rivers. When this is done, the assembled gods are aghast. Ea, god of wisdom, is the one everyone looks to for words at times like these, and with great godly wrath he provides them. Turning to Kumarbi, he says, "Why are you destroying humanity? They will not give sacrifices to the gods if they're all dead. They'll no longer burn incense cedar for you. If you destroy humanity, they'll no longer worship any gods. No one will offer beer or bread to you. Even Tessub, the heroic king, will be forced to grasp the plow. Even your sister Shaushka and Tessub's wife Hebat will be forced to grind the millstone. What is your problem, Kumarbi? Why are you trying to harm mankind? Does not the mortal take his grain heap and promptly offer it to you? Does he not make offerings to you, Kumarbi, father of the gods, with joy in his heart as he stands amidst your splendor in the temple? Do they not also offer to Tessub and to me, Ea, as well? But no, Kumarbi, you are putting wisdom behind ambition, and bringing forth the blood and tears of all mankind for your foolishness." An interesting rant from an interesting god. For the most part, it's pretty self-explanatory. Clearly, Kumarbi's attempt at dethroning Tessub has done untold damage to the mortal realm, and threatens a disaster of apocalyptic proportions. But, perhaps uniquely among the Kumarbi texts that we still have, Tessub has not actually been overthrown in this tale. Rather, the destruction that Kumarbi's constant rebellions has wrought is finally irritating the other gods, and most critically, the god Ea, who in these Hurrian myths appears as a wise counselor and kingmaker, a god who holds all the power, but few of the titles that go along with it. But however wise Ea is, Kumarbi is having none of it, and spits right back, "How could you talk to me like this in front of everyone? My rage is boiling over. Why would you strike me, Ea? How can you defend humanity like this, when my divine and royal prerogatives are so much more important? You are foremost among the gods, but consider these insignificant humans to be more important than my kingship." Kumarbi is letting it all out now, speaking directly from his mind. "The rightful king is me, Kumarbi, son of Allalu, but you have brought me down to the god Amizadu." What the story with Amizadu is, we aren't certain. He's probably a native Syrian agriculture god, but we don't know much more about early Syrian myths. But what is for certain is that Kumarbi was mad as hell and wasn't going to take it anymore. And there, in the midst of the council of the gods, Kumarbi summons up Hedammu to be his surrogate in battle against Tessub. The heroic Tessub naturally rises to the challenge. The battle between the two is so fierce that the clay tablet describing it is shattered, and left us only with fragments. The most interesting fragment appears to be a portion narrated in first person, a report by someone who had seen the fight. Here, it seems that both Tessub and his sister Shaushka, who in Hurrian myth is a local goddess, but one who has been heavily entwined with the Mesopotamian Ishtar, She battled the Hedammu creature, and the conflict was intense. Tessub, god of storms, brought lightning down in tremendous quantities. Either Tessub or the Hedammu brought an intense driving rain to the fight, and with the water pouring so violently, bystanders were swept away, and even the battling gods appeared to have difficulty resisting the current. Whoever is reporting this battle was apparently pulled at the knees by the current and swept away, spinning and dizzy like a potter's wheel, and the reporter's entire family was pulled out of the fight. No one knows just how the fight ended, but it appears to have been a draw, where both sides were forced to pull back, Hedammu returning to the deep ocean. In the aftermath, Tessub says to Shaushka that they and Hedammu will have to face each other again for a decisive battle. If I win, Tessub says, the world will be right again. But if Hedammu is allowed to run unopposed, it'll be a disaster for the world. And this disaster will be my own fault for lacking the strength to stop him. But there's a problem, and Shaushka knows it. Hedammu can retreat to the deep ocean whenever he wants, and Tessub cannot follow. And so she goes to her bathhouse and summons her most lovely and talented assistant goddesses. Picking two and handing each a musical instrument, the three women go to the edge of the sea and begin to sing, play, and gyrate sensually. The sound of the goddesses playing travels through the waters of the ocean. The sight of the beautiful Shaushka dancing can be seen through the clear waters. And Hedammu raises his head above the water, tempted right as Shaushka begins to undress, performing a striptease. "Who are you," Hedammu asks, "that rather than fearing me and my destruction, you present yourself in so beguiling a fashion?" The two then have a lengthy discussion in which Hedammu is increasingly seduced by the beautiful Shaushka. At a certain point, Hedammu's mother, Sertap-Suruhi, even shows up, likely to warn her son of the dangers of temptresses, but she's overridden by the young monster's raging hormones. In some fragments, Hedammu seems interested in eating Shaushka, though in precisely what sense this is meant is unclear. In the end, he's completely enraptured by the goddess of love and passion, and she hits him with a straight-up love potion, which puts him to sleep. The love potion appears to have had quite a lot of alcohol, which probably explains Hedammu's drowsiness. As he sleeps, Shaushka continues to whisper in Hedammu's ear, and he comes further and further out from the water. Finally, he stirs, and in dreamlike haze pounces on the still naked Shaushka, having intercourse with her and getting her pregnant. But in this moment of supreme vulnerability, someone slices open Hedammu's belly, and out come the remains of everything he's eaten. Here, at the end of what we have in this tale, it seems that the death toll was in fact horrifying. The remains of 130 cities come out of one hole in his stomach. Then they cut again, and another 70 cities come pouring out. This sea monster has eaten 200 cities in his reign of terror, and out like flowing mountains come a massive pile of severed heads. The rest of the story, indeed the whole last portion of it, is very badly broken and hard to read, but it seems that the day has been saved and Hedammu has been destroyed, at least in part through Shaushka's seduction of the monster. But Kumarbi still isn't dismayed. He's lost favor with pretty much everyone and nearly destroyed the world in his quest for kingship. And he has one more plot left as we move from the Song of Hedammu to the Song of Ullikummi. This last one is the most complete and readable of all the Kumarbi Cycle songs, and gives us a strong sense that much is missing even from our reconstructions of the other tales. But we work with what we have. We begin again with Kumarbi, known as the father of all the gods, forming yet another clever plan. He's going to cause an evil day to dawn by creating yet another hostile man to send against the storm god Tessub. Kumarbi entertains these wise thoughts in his mind and aligns them like beads on a string, presumably the Hurrian idiomatic way of saying he organizes his thoughts. Once Kumarbi has formed this clever plan in his mind, he promptly arose from his chair. In his hand he took his staff, and on his feet, like winged sandals, he puts the winds, allowing him to fly, and he leaves his sacred city of Urkesh for a place called Cold Spring. It seems that in the place called Cold Spring, there was a massive rock, 3 miles wide and 1.5 miles long. Kumarbi's mind raced with excitement at what he was about to do. Now, there's no way to say this delicately, but Kumarbi took his manhood and thrust it into this rock, engaging in very little intercourse with a mountain. After one round, he would lay back, recover, and then turn back again to hump the hole in the rock where his seed was deposited. The god and the large rock slept together 15 times, just to make sure that the rock got pregnant. Yep, that is the genius plan Kumarbi has come up with. He bangs a large rock. A long section after this is lost, and somewhere it seems Kumarbi has offended the sea god, possibly by cheating on his daughter with a large mountain. We have an extensive scene which, despite its length, tells us very little about what's happening, where Kumarbi visits the sea god and reaches some sort of agreement with him. Eventually, the sea god is happy, and a bit later, Kumarbi is being handed his newborn son, who's literally just a rock, by the fate goddesses and the mother goddess. Kumarbi is sitting there wondering what the child's name should be, and decides to pick the least subtle name possible, announcing that his new son would be named Ullikummi, which literally means the destroyer of the town of Kumia. Kumia being the main holy city of Tessub, who Kumarbi hoped Ullikummi would be slaying. Kumarbi gives a benediction over his beloved rock lump, saying, "Let him go to heaven for kingship. Let him suppress the fine city of Kumia. Let him strike Tessub. Let him chop him up like fine chaff. Let him grind him underfoot like an ant. Let him snap off Tasmisu like a brittle reed. Let him scatter all the gods down from the sky like birds. Let him smash them like empty pottery bowls." Yes, nothing subtle about Kumarbi's intention here at all. And remember, he's saying this before a decent number of important other gods and goddesses. Anyway, when he had said these things, Kumarbi had a new problem. Where was he going to raise this child? He needed to be kept safe and hidden for long enough that the child would grow. Otherwise, Tessub and the other gods would naturally kill him while he was still an infant. Kumarbi wasn't going to raise the child himself. That would be ridiculous. Kumarbi preferred being an absentee sort of father, one who abandons his children and then shows up 20 years later to demand that they do whatever he wants. One assumes Kumarbi never owned a #1 dad mug. Kumarbi calls his messenger Impaluri, and Impaluri goes to fetch some goddesses called the Asira deities. Neither of these are important on their own, and you don't need to remember them. But Kumarbi's messenger tells the Asira deities, "Come, the father of the gods is calling you. I'm not going to tell you what it's about, just come when you're called." And these deities obey promptly. Kumarbi then asks them to go secretly to put the young Ullikummi on the shoulder of a fellow named Ubaluri. Now, Ubaluri is a bit like the Greek figure of Atlas, a giant who holds up the sky. When Ullikummi is placed on Ubaluri's shoulder, he begins to grow, and grow fast. A few meters every day, 100 meters in a month. Soon Enlil, the Mesopotamian king of gods, though in this story he's only an ancient and venerable lord of wind, spots this child. Immediately, he thinks to himself that this must be another of Kumarbi's plots to bring down Tessub, and he shakes his head in disgust, wondering just how much Kumarbi is willing to destroy this time for his mad schemes. But for some unclear reason, seriously, there aren't even broken parts of the text here, it just goes unstated, Enlil doesn't seem to do anything to stop this, or to let anyone know, despite him seeing it, and despite him disapproving of it, and despite him being a sky-related god, and so he should presumably be on Teshub's side. But whatever, that's how it goes sometimes. And so, after 15 days of standing on Ubuluri's shoulder, Ullikummi has grown to be 50 meters tall. He is a solid lump of basalt rock, standing straight and proud, and seemingly nothing that hits it can hurt it. Ubuluri and Ullikummi are both standing in the ocean, it seems, or maybe way out in the Mediterranean Sea. But as Ullikummi grows, the water level is relatively lower on his body. First his waist, then he gets taller and it's down to his knees, then he gets taller and it's down to his feet. And soon enough, the sun god looks down and spots this anomaly on his daily trip across the sky, and wonders what this new god is. That evening, as he approached the sea most closely in the west, he took a real good look at Ullikummi and became enraged. Though it was nearly sunset, the sun god changed his course in the heavens and went directly to Teshub's house. Tashmisu saw the sun god approaching and knew right away that there was trouble. The matter must be important. There must be some severe struggle or a dire battle, or heaven must be in an uproar with famine and death throughout the land. And so he naturally got some food and drink ready for the coming dignitary. But when the sun god arrived, he refused all hospitality. Again, the very image of a messenger with a message too urgent for politeness. At first, Teshub is acting obtuse, feeling offended that his hospitality was refused. But soon the sun god breaks in and tells him the bad news that a great god made of stone is growing way out in the ocean. But showing that he always possessed dignity and true nobility, he suppressed his anger and said to the sun god, "Now that your message is delivered, would you care to partake of my hospitality?" To which the sun god agreed, before returning to his duties in the sky. Meanwhile, Teshub considered his options, but decided that an immediate strike in full force was the best plan of action, grabbing his brother Tashmisu and sister Shaushka and gearing up all three of them for war. Departing from their shrines, all three looked formidable, holding hands in solidarity. They made their way up to the top of Mount Hazi, where Teshub looked over the ocean to where the basalt god could be seen in the distance. But as soon as he saw Ullikummi, Teshub's entire demeanor changed. He fell to the ground, his knees weak from fear, and tears flowed in his eyes like stinging rivers. He bawled in fear there atop the mountain, unable to even look at the enemy from half a world away. The sheer, terrifying power radiating from Ullikummi, even at this distance, completely unmanned and defeated the Divine King without a shot being fired. Shaushka tried to console him, but the three of them retreated from the mountaintop and went their separate ways to consider the problem. In the city of Nineveh, Shaushka knew that her womanly charms were a strength that could often outmatch the physical strength of men. And indeed, in the last story, we saw her winning the day through seduction. And so, she summoned the attendant goddesses and equipped them with musical instruments once again. Then she went to the shores of the ocean, dressed in nothing but a seashell and a pebble, and tried the trick that had worked on Hedammu. For hours she danced, gyrated, and sang on the beach, with her exquisitely talented goddesses accompanying her. But she saw no movement out in the distance. Finally, a god whose name is unreadable arose from the sea with a great wave, and he said, "This is a lovely show you're putting on, but you know he can't see you. Ullikummi is a basalt rock. He literally cannot see. He literally cannot hear, and even if he could, rocks don't get horny." This revelation completely killed the mood, and Shaushka extinguished the incense candles she had lit, put some clothes on, and everyone went home defeated. After this, a section is lost, but when it opens, Teshub has regained his courage. Perhaps he's optimistic that since his enemy, literally a motionless rock that is deaf and blind, possesses a weakness, then perhaps it can be defeated. He's calling his brother Tasmasu and giving him instructions for preparing Teshub's chariot. Both the bulls that will pull it need to be pampered a bit, the armor's scales need to be installed onto the chariot and the animals, the axle needs to be inspected, and so forth. Meanwhile, Teshub calls forth a storm so mighty that it's out smashing rocks a mile away. Finally, Teshub's chariot lights out over the open ocean, charging on the surface of the water. Jesus may have walked on water, but Teshub, the hurrying storm god, charged his divine chariot on the surface of the water. At 500 meters from his enemy, seeing the wind beating at the great and growing basalt monster, he ordered his bulls to charge in earnest. The battle, as is depressingly common, is lost to us, with the tablet breaking shortly after Teshub held his weapons at the ready and began his charge. However, Teshub is unable to do anything at all to the monster, beating on it with weapons and storms, yet nothing he does can even dent Ullikummi's solid form. Seeing Teshub fall upon the battlefield, a warrior god named Astabi sprang into action. Pulling together an impromptu army of 70 war gods, each mounted upon chariots, they zoomed across the ocean to reinforce the divine king. 70 gods grabbed Ullikummi, but even all together they were unable to even move him. And when Ullikummi struck back, Astabi and his 70 divine warriors were thrown into the ocean. Everyone fled, and by the time they looked back, Ullikummi had grown so tall that he was now 9,000 miles tall and 9,000 miles wide. It had, in fact, grown so large that it now stood at the gates of the city of Kemia, Teshub's holy city, without having taken a single step off of Ullikummi's shoulder. The city finds itself besieged, and no word can get in or out. Here, Teshub's wife Habat begins to worry, since she can no longer hear from her husband's temple, and sends a messenger to go check on the city. The messenger comes back, reporting that Kemia is in grave peril, and so Lady Habat follows her messenger to Kemia, fearing that Teshub has been killed. They have some sort of peril, but make it into the city where Teshub and Tasmasu are hard at work trying to find some way to defeat Ullikummi before the city really is destroyed. Teshub has a few ideas he wants to try, but Tasmasu is concerned that if they leave from the throne, there will be no king in heaven. Instead, he suggests they should go to Ea. Even though he isn't technically on our side, perhaps if we show him elaborate obsequiousness, he will condescend to help us in our fight. And so they went to Apsua, the Hurrian home of Ea, and before the front door they each bowed 5 times. Then before the inner door they each bowed 5 times. Then before Ea himself they each bowed 15 times. You may recall from the tale of Hedammu that Ea is already growing disenchanted with Kumarbi's faction, and this elaborate respect shown by Teshub appears to help sway him more fully to Teshub's side. Ea still has harsh words for Teshub and his previous disrespect, and for his part in this running feud, but eventually allows them to come consult the great tablets of knowledge, wherein they hope to find a weakness of Ullikummi. And sure enough, they read of a copper cutting tool, the item which separated heaven from earth in the very earliest days, and a plan immediately comes to mind. Ea goes to Enlil and explains the situation to him, reporting on how Ullikummi has grown 9,000 miles high and must be stopped immediately. If Enlil had any reaction, we have lost it in the tablet damage. Ea next goes to Ubaluri, the giant who is holding up Ullikummi. He and Ea exchange polite, formal greetings, and Ea asked Ubaluri if he's aware that a 9,000-mile-high stone god of death is perched upon his right shoulder. Ubaluri replies that it's not really in his nature to notice things, just in general. I could sympathize with that, but he has started to wonder about an ache developing on his shoulder, that he didn't really until now know what the cause was. Ea assured Ubuluri that the issue would be handled soon. Neither of these interactions really advance the plot, but take a look at how nice it is to go around being polite to people and letting everyone know what's going on before rushing to action and violence, like Kumarbi and Tessub have been doing. Ea really is a great role model for all the Near Eastern cultures. Except for the tale where he raped 6 generations of his own daughters, which was pretty horrifying. But that was already discussed back in episode 14 if you are interested in learning the full story of my favorite god. Next, Ea goes up to the primeval gods, and with all due politeness, he asks them to open up the storehouses of their grandfathers, where the really keen treasures are all kept. He convinces them to lend him the copper cutting tool, and then the tablet breaks again. When we pick up, Ea is speaking to Tessub and Tasmasu on the eve of battle. He's dressing them down for all their failings up to this point. He's terribly upset, for whenever he looks at Tessub, all he can see is how many people have died over his stupid power struggle. But still, he's willing to help Tessub now, and sends Tessub out to fight Ullikummi one more time. Tasmasu clapped 3 times to summon all the gods to the assembly, and the assembled gods begin to bellow like cattle at the massive stone monster, who can neither see nor hear, but it's good that they're participating. Tessub then leapt into his chariot and with a roar like thunder plowed into the sea. They battled, but this time Ullikummi spoke calmly to Tessub, while Tessub flailed impotently at him. He was very polite, this massive stone murderer, but very firm. He gave Tessub credit for finally getting Ea on his side, since that will be the keystone of any divine reign. But still, Ullikummi had made up his mind to destroy the city of Kumia, to take the throne of heaven, to scatter all the gods down from the sky, just like dear old Dad wanted. Ullikummi bid Tessub to stand like a man in this final hour and fight honorably. Then, after a bit more discussion, Ea, who had snuck around back while Ullikummi was distracted, used the copper cutting tool that had once severed heaven from earth to cut Ullikummi off of Ubuluri's shoulder. Suddenly, the once invincible, ever-growing god has lost his source of strength, and he is vulnerable again. And the assembled army of gods does not hesitate to finally strike down the greatest of enemies they had ever faced. Now that Tessub has many victories under his belt, the approval of the general mass of gods, the more direct approval of Ea, god of wisdom, his kingship in heaven is assured. It's likely that the tale of Ullikummi was meant as a final ending to the long cycle of Kumarbi's attempts to regain his throne. And from this point on, Kumarbi would be forced to accept that kingship in heaven had passed forever out of his lineage. Thus ends the Kumarbi Cycle, the greatest Hurrian literature that still survives to this day. These tales, as has been seen already, would exert a great influence on the rest of the Near East, and even into classical Greece. But of course their main purpose was to bring the Hurrian people themselves closer to their gods. The many victories of Tessub were victories for the Hurrians, for they were always on his side, and Tessub was always on their side. And as the Mitanni kingdom helped the widely dispersed Hurrian people to unify and expand to become one of the great powers of the Late Bronze Age, surely these tales were an inspiration for generations of young boys who wanted nothing more than to emulate the brave deeds of Tessub and his warrior allies. But though this is the greatest work of the Kumarbi Cycle, we are not yet done with Hurrian myth. There is one more tale, and one more aspect of Hurrian literature that we need to explore. Ideas of philosophy, both political and moral, while not quite formalized on the level that the Greeks would devise, have been evolving over the course of 1,000 years, ever since the ancient instructions of Shuruppak were written a millennium ago in ancient Sumer. Not only have the ideas shifted a bit, the ways in which they are expressed has also developed in this time. So join us next time for a multi-part tale of wisdom in which good advice and political discussions will be dispensed in new and creative forms. Thank you for listening.